Okay, so we're being recorded. So thanks for joining us, though. I know that we have, even though this is a task group meeting of the Municipal Vulnerability Index, I know that it's open to the public, and we may have some individuals joining us who haven't been on as many of our task group meetings so far. So I thought we would go ahead and start with some introductions just to lay a little bit of groundwork before we get rolling. My name is Melanie Sands, and I'm a senior social scientist with Eastern Research Group, and we're the contractor working with the Vermont Climate Action Office on this project. With me are my colleagues who have done so much work on this project, Lindy Lowe, Caitlin Barber, Anna Claire Marley, Jim Chilton, and Elizabeth Weathers, and we'll be tapping into some different people on the team as we go through the presentation, and then also potentially through questions and answers today. But our team has been working with the Climate Action Office, and then I think I'll turn it over to Marion, and then perhaps Jane could also introduce herself.
Great. Well, thanks everyone for joining. It looks like we have quite a number of folks from the Vermont Climate Council and various subcommittees, so great to see everybody here today. My name is Marion Woles. I'm the Resilience Adaptation Coordinator in the Climate Action Office, working closely with ERG and the MVI task group on this tool, and we're excited to share it with you today. I'll hand it over to Jane.
Afternoon, everybody. Happy Friday. Thanks for having me here too. I lead the Climate Action Office and have been working closely with Marion and ERG on this project as well. Really happy to be at this place and looking forward to hearing your input and feedback on today's presentation. So thanks for joining us.
Thanks, Marion and Jane. A couple other individuals or groups I want to mention, and I do have a slide that I want to share, but before we get into the slides, I did want to acknowledge that we're working with the Agency of Digital Services, and Eric Engstrom has put in a lot of work on this project, so I wanted to make sure I acknowledge Eric's efforts. And then also our task group members, and so I'm going to share screens, and I want to I'll share a screen in a minute of everyone in the Municipal Vulnerability task group who's participated, but thank you so much for everyone in the task group who has helped with this project and provided really helpful and insightful information and feedback as we've gone through the process. So with that, I'm going to go ahead and share my screen, and we'll get started.
Your screen looks good.
Okay, great. It's always good to check. All right. So here, I know I was just touching on the task group membership. For any of you who are in the Vermont Climate Council or other members of the public joining us today, you can see here a list of our task group membership who has really been very helpful in this project. So we wanted to acknowledge the membership here before we got started. So I'll just leave this up for a minute so you can take a look across the different committees and people joining us. So our agenda for today, we're in the middle of the welcome. We're going to transition to an update of the status of the project and our remaining timeline for the project. We're going to then transition into an update of the tool development since we last connected, and just provide where we're at for those who have not been on the journey of the tool development. And then we'll transition to a walkthrough of the resulting tool that we've developed, and also some use cases to really provide a better understanding of some of the tools, features, and functions, and the type of things you might come across in using the tool. And then our last portion of the conversation or presentation, we'll open it up to questions and comments. So along the way, if you have questions and answers, if you could please enter them into the Q&A function, and then we'll have a log of those for whenever we do get to questions at the end of the meeting. All right, so we're going to begin with just our current project status and timeline. So where we're at currently in the project is we're wrapping up this first iteration of the Municipal Vulnerability Index. It's going to be a tool that's going to be updated over time. So we're framing as the first iteration, our ground level core MVI. And the final tool should be developed by the end of February, where we pretty much have that completed, and we're making some final tweaks. to really finalize the tool. We're also conducting some final presentations on the tool. One, we had a public presentation on Tuesday, and then we have this presentation as well. And anything we glean from that for any final tweaks to the tool, we'll be making those. And then once everything is finalized on our end, everything will get passed over to Eric and his team at the state of Vermont, where the tool will be housed and updated. We're also right now developing some documentation for the project, and that is also going to accompany the tool. One of those pieces of documentation is a user guide that's going to accompany the tool. So really laying out a lot of what we'll talk about today, but also a lot of information that we've talked about in prior task group meetings, such as the methods used to develop the tool, tool user functions, examples. So really trying to help the user get their bearings and get some insight in using the tool and interpreting the information and data. And then we're also developing a final project report, and that is really going to encapsulate all of the information and the tasks and activities we've completed under this project. And it will also include some profiles of communities where we take the tool and we analyze the different information in the tool per that community to really illustrate how the tool could be used and some of the insights or findings you might draw out in using a tool for a given community. And both the user guide and that project report are slated to be completed by mid-April. So in looking down the screen there, the release date for the MVI is anticipated around mid-April, and that date is really scheduled around the fact that we'll then have the user guide or the documentation to go along with the final tool so that that can be released as the tool is available. As we get into April and May, we're going to then have a tool training with the regional planning commissions to help start orienting users to the tool and getting them trained up on the Municipal Vulnerability Index. So moving forward with documentation and getting the tool out there and training people up. So we're on the cusp of a lot of things for spring. So now we're going to just transition into a brief update on the tool development since we last connected. And so what you can see here, I thought before we get into some aspects of the tool development process, just for those who may have not been on task group meetings, providing an overview of the tool development process that we've undertaken. And then we also, I know, haven't had a task group meeting in a while, and so also just a refresher of the process that we've been involved in. So going left to right, maybe I'll get a little pointer out here. So going left to right, we began with an evaluation of existing geospatial tools and platforms to better understand what can we learn from existing tools, what they produce, the type of data they use, and how can that inform the development of the MVI. After completing that evaluation of existing tools, we conducted several different types of stakeholder engagement. And you can see some of those different types of engagement coming off the bottom of that orange stakeholder engagement item in the middle. And so we conducted interviews with 5 different municipalities. We conducted interviews with representatives of organizations that work with different affected populations or populations who might be disproportionately impacted by climate change for reasons such as race or gender or income or their geographic location. We also conducted a couple of bigger meetings of tool users, one with municipalities and one where we invited regional planning commissions. So after we conducted that bucket of background research of evaluation of existing tools and the stakeholder engagement, we really started forming a picture of what are these factors or things that inform climate vulnerability? Because those are the kind of things we needed to think about for the tool. What informs climate vulnerability at the municipal level? What information and data can we find that gets at that? And with all of that in mind, we then moved on to creating or thinking about what's the framework or methods we're going to use to develop the tool. So how will we show these things in the tool? What will the tool look like? So we went on to develop a framework and methods. And then we had here in this blue little, I guess it's sort of an arrow coming up from the bottom. We had some working group meetings with tool partners or people whose work overlapped with the development of the MVI, and also, again, with the Agency for Digital Services, really trying to learn from other tool users and groups about alignment with their tool, things we should consider. So we have a framework of methods. We understand some of the aspects we need to adhere to or think about in terms of the tool development. And then we moved over to developing a draft tool. After we developed the draft tool, we undertook some beta testing, which we'll talk about a little bit more today. And then we're on to this presentation of the final tool. The other thing I'd point out relevant to this group is these yellow arrow boxes going across the top, really indicating that at different key junctures in the project and the tool development process, we did engage with the task group, the MVI task group, and it's been really helpful to get different input and feedback along the way as we went through these key junctures. So with that in mind, that overarching process, just thought I'd recap the methods and framework that we are using for the tool. In working with the Climate Action Office and other individuals at the state and with feedback from the task group, we determined that for the tool, we would use this flexible user-guided approach. And in the flexible user-guided approach, what it really does is it takes the different factors or things that inform climate vulnerability, and it uses a geospatial layer for that information. So what it really does is it outputs or generates this geospatial information that is layered rather than a single metric or a score. And in this type of setup, a user can select a location and conduct their own assessment of vulnerability and the hazard. So they might take a hazard of interest and some either maybe like a social factor or something about the built environment, different things of interest, layer them on top of each other and take a look at what's going on here in my, well, I was going to say community, but area of interest if you're not looking at a community level, to really make an assessment of what you're looking at. We also determined that where we didn't have geospatial information, it could be helpful at the municipal level to indicate where a municipality is above a state threshold or a state average for certain types of information. We'll take Anna Claire will walk us through an example of what that looks like in the tool. I think that will make a little bit more sense at that time. But for non-geospatial information, we do indicate those types of where a municipality is above a state threshold is another way of looking at the non-geospatial data in the tool. But I think that will be helpful when we see an example of that. We also talked about and decided upon the fact that we would need to use existing data and existing data sets for the tool, given the time frame, and that we would make that underlying data and for the factors and the hazards, we would make that data available or accessible so people could learn more about the data sources and have more detailed information on the underlying data. And then I think I mentioned this previously, but the tool is designed to be updatable. So those kinds of considerations would need to be made as well. So I think this is maybe where we pick up from our last task group meeting in some ways. And so in developing the tool, we're now into the tool development phase. As I mentioned on that broader slide of the workflow, we conducted some working sessions with developers of related tools or tools that we might have something in common with where there's some overlap to help ensure alignment, but also just to learn from what previous tool developers have done, making sure that we're considering all we need to from a data perspective, from a tool alignment perspective, really just trying to learn what others have done and how we might need to consider that in the development of the MVI. And so we spoke with individuals who worked in the development of BioFinder, the Transportation Resilience and Planning tool, the Community Resilience Index, for example. Again, it was a collaborative effort with the Agency of Digital Services because we wanted to make sure that the tool does align with Vermont systems, the software, the type of the platform we even developed the tool in, and making sure that that is all going to be a seamless transition. We developed the tool in ArcGIS Experience Builder, and we really used out-of-the-box or standard functionality in that program in developing the tool, and we'll talk about that in the next slide. And then after that's all developed, it will all get transferred over to the state of Vermont in their ArcGIS profile, where the tool will be finalized and made publicly available and also maintained over time. So as I mentioned, we developed the MVI and ArcGIS Experience Builder, and this first iteration of the tool uses that off-the-shelf standard version so that we could develop the tool at a pretty efficient manner. And also in doing that, and really it being in the first iteration of the tool, it allows for opportunities to identify where further customization might be beneficial in future iterations of the tool. Some considerations in using these standard or out-of-the-box functions, it really dictates what is possible in some aspects of the tool though. And it really dictates what's possible in terms of things like aesthetics, in terms of how certain types of web services can be integrated. And it also dictates what's possible in certain functions, such as the type of layers, what can appear in a legend, the type of print, things like that. So it does shape some of those core aspects of the project or of the tool as well. So once we developed that draft tool, we then undertook a round of tool testing. And we had, Marion was great to reach out to people who have been involved in some aspects of really the tool development process, whether it's through engagement. Anybody here in the task group was invited, as well as maybe some state staff. So we reached out to 29 different individuals to participate in tool testing, and 11 individuals participated. We really conducted the testing through a questionnaire that we developed using Qualtrics survey software. So it was an online survey. And people who participated in the survey were asked to work through and think through 2 different written scenarios just to really familiarize themselves with the tool, get used to the functions and features, practice navigating it, getting the lay of the land. And then we asked a series of 9 core questions to elicit feedback. And I say 9 core questions because depending on what you answered for those 9 questions, you may have had follow-up questions, for example. So we're really trying to get feedback though on the aesthetics of the tool, the functions and features of the tool, how easy or challenging it was to use the tool, and also just gathering suggested improvements in general. What we found through the tool testing process was that overall tool testers felt the tool was rather visually appealing and had potentially a lot of useful information. We also had a lot of suggestions for improvement that were really helpful. And some of the themes of feedback that we received are listed here. So for example, there were suggestions or themes around updating or revising some of the color schemes. We had feedback in general about how the layers are overlaid, and the process needed to see some of the underlying layers could be frustrating, or maybe that was unclear in using the tool. There's also a large desire to get more help interpreting the data and have data references labeled in the tool. So as you're looking at the information, you could see the data sources. And then also, in general, understanding that a detailed user guide with clear instructions and examples to help users navigate the tool. And really, I think the examples really showing how that really plays out so people could kind of check their understanding of things, that detailed user guide and instructions could be really helpful as well moving forward. There are some comments that we were able to address, and you could see some of them here. So one suggestion was that additional boundary layers that were not in the original version of the tool, such as boundary layers for counties and regional planning commissions, adding those boundaries could be really helpful. So we added those. We did add data source layers or data sources to the layer names, the legends, or the pop-ups on the map. We did modify the color schemes across the different layers to make distinctions between things a little clearer. We adjusted spatial extents and text contrast. And then we're also taking the feedback more holistically and incorporating it into the user guide. There was some feedback that we received that we're not able to address in this iteration of the tool. And some of that feedback pertained to different methodological decisions that were made by the team and by the project to date. Some things that pertain to data limitations that we're working with, and also different items that might relate to the standard features and what's possible in Experience Builder using those standard features. Where we were not able to incorporate feedback, we are capturing it in the final report so that it can be considered as future iterations of the tool are developed. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to my colleague, Anna Claire Marley, who's going to walk through the tool as it is today and some of the use cases that we can get a better understanding of the resulting product. So Anna Claire, I'm going to stop sharing my screen so that you can share yours.
All right. Okay. And you can see my screen fine. Yeah. All right. Cool. Well, hi everyone. I'm Anna Claire. For walking through that. I'm a climate resilience and data specialist at ERG, and I'm just going to walk through kind of how we use the tool and some use cases for it. So when you load up the tool, this is kind of the base map that you'll see. So we have the base map in the background with the Vermont towns loaded up here. And then on the left-hand side, you'll see the different map layers with the different factor groupings that Melanie talked about, like built and physical environment, community, etc. And I'm going to show you how we use those in a second. And then on the right-hand side here, we have the legend, which shows you what the layers are that are displaying on the map and any more information about those. On the bottom left-hand side, we have a few buttons. So this one that looks kind of like a stack of layered paper is the button for showing and hiding the map layers. This button is for showing and hiding the legend, but both of the layers and the legend should pop up automatically. And then there's this print button feature, which I'll show a little bit later how to use, but it basically takes whatever is shown on the page and lets you print it to put in a report. And here we have the base map button. So for example, when you click that button, there'll be a base map gallery and you can choose between a bunch of different types of base maps. You might want to do that. You might want to put up a satellite base map so you can see some more detail when you zoom in about a specific area. Or in the case here, I just put a cleaner gray background on if you just want to have something that's a little less distracting in the background. So you can choose whatever you want to display with the tool. But for now, I'm just going to go back to this base background. So again, on the left here, you have the map layers. And then to open them, you just have to click the little arrow button, and then you can see all the different factors that are within the grouping. And then to display any of the layers, all you have to do is click on the little I button. For example, let's do low income here. And so now we can see there's no cross on the I, and I can see the layers on the map. So areas that don't have data for a specific town is usually because there's not data available for that specific town for that specific data set. So what I'm showing you on the map right here is the percent of people with incomes that are less than 2 times the federal poverty rate. And then we have a legend here so you can see what the range of values are for that. And this data and a lot of the other data from the social domain category is from the US Census Bureau American Community Survey data. So you can just see from clicking on a layer, the general distribution of values across Vermont. And if you're interested in a specific town, you can click on it And then there'll be a pop-up that tells you what the actual value is for that specific town. And it also tells you what the data source is. And then I just wanted to point out here, if you press these little the three dots next to any factor, you can increase or decrease the transparency. And I'll also show you an example of what that looks like. Maybe you want to see the base map underneath better, or there's some layers underneath you want to look at better. So that's to adjust that. And then you could also export the data for any of the factors. So when you export this, you can export it as a JSON, CSV, or GeoJSON, which is very similar to a shapefile and works pretty much the same way. And when this data is going to have the information for the layer that you clicked on for all of the towns. So then you can filter within that data set to a specific town or a few towns that you're interested in. Okay, so the Vermont Municipal Vulnerability Index includes several ways to understand the vulnerability within a town or city using both map layers and flags to identify factors that are known to influence climate vulnerability. While all the factors included in the tool affect vulnerability, the tool includes flags when a municipality has more than the state average of a factor that needs to have heightened attention. So for example, I clicked on Granville here, and you can see this list of all these different climate vulnerabilities. So let's take this one, percentage of outdoor workers is above the state average. So people who work outside have an increased vulnerability to many climate hazards. So if a town has a higher number of outdoor workers than the state average, that town receives a flag for that factor to ensure that attention is paid to identifying strategies for outreach and education for that population, as well as how to develop actions that the state and municipality can take to reduce risks to outdoor workers. So this flagging system allows the users to quickly identify a range of the vulnerabilities that are most relevant to that town because they are marked as having above or below the state average, depending on what the flag is. And note that if you want to look to see what the actual numbers are for each of these climate vulnerabilities, you can always go back and load that layer up and click on the town and see more information and see how it looks compared to all the other towns as well. I just wanted to point out that we also have a handful of climate and vulnerability assessments that were separate from this tool that could be helpful to look at. So this is, for example, we have the transportation resilience planning data. So this is a separate tool that was developed by the Agency of Transportation, and it's controlled by them. We just pulled it into the tool, and we'll include a direct link to the tool in the user guide for people to look at as well. So in this example, I just opened the other vulnerability projects domain category, and then I expand the transportation resilience planning tool, and then I clicked on the I for roads. So here you're seeing all the roads data across Vermont from the transportation resilience planning tool and whether they're high, medium, low, unknown risk. Okay, so we also have done quite a bit of analysis on other hazards as well, some of our own analysis. So for example, here I opened the hazards layer and I clicked on drought. And we can see the average number of weeks in severe to exceptional drought per year from 2000 to 2022 across Vermont. This data was available by county, so that's why there's these big patches there. And you can see, for example, the darkest color goes up to about 18.3 weeks. So this area, that means this area experiences on average around 18 weeks of drought, at least between the period of analysis when the data was available for. And this data is from the US Drought Monitor. Another really interesting piece of data we have, some of the hazard data is historical data, but where possible, we try to use projected data that accounts for future scenarios with climate change. So here I'm showing high temperature projections. So these are the days above 90 degrees Fahrenheit per year. And we got this data is from global climate models, but global climate models have a really coarse resolution. So that just means that each grid square of a global climate model is many, many miles, which is not that helpful for local planning or even looking at things on the state level. So there's different statistical methods that scientists use to try and bring that data down to the local level so that it accounts for Vermont's climate and local features. So the method that we use is called LOCA, which is also what one of the methods the National Climate Assessment uses for their analyses. And UC San Diego already did this statistical analysis using LOCA, so that's where we got the data from. So that's why the data source for here is UC San Diego. So that's where the data came from, but if we want to dig into more of like what these layers are showing us. So kind of like the latest and greatest way, well, first let me point out that we have here the different years groupings that we looked at. So 2015 to 2044, 2045 to 2074, and 2075 to 2100. So we have those 3-year groupings, and then we have 2 different SSPs. So SSPs are shared socioeconomic pathways, which, as I was going to say, are basically like the latest and greatest way to show how climate change could happen in the future. And all they are basically narratives or stories, kind of putting together what could happen. So there's many different ones, but we chose to focus on the middle of the road scenario and the fossil fuel development scenario. So middle of the road just means that it's a world where trends broadly follow the historical patterns that they have. So basically a world where we don't really change much in terms of acting on climate change. So it's kind of like a business as usual scenario. And then we also looked at the fossil fuel development scenario, which is a world of rapid and unconstrained growth in economic output and energy use. So that scenario is if we ramp up using fossil fuels even more, and basically sort of a worst case scenario. So in that way, we looked at kind of what happens if nothing really changes, and then what happens in the worst case scenario. So for example, in this map right here, I'm showing you the middle of the road scenario for 2045 to 2074. And if you're looking at the map, you can see things are broadly in the yellows and oranges. So between 0 and around 40 days per year with temperatures above 90 degrees Fahrenheit. But then if you look at the fossil fuel scenario, again, this is a world where we ramp up fossil fuel emissions. You can see that's changes, so starting to get into the darker oranges and darker reds with a lot more days above 90 degrees each year. And then another thing I wanted to point out is that this tool has a bunch of geospatial data showing us a bunch of different climate vulnerabilities and hazards, but there's also things that affect Vermont that we don't necessarily have geospatial data for, but we still wanted to point out in this tool for users to look at. So if you look down here, there's the additional vulnerability section at the bottom, and there's different text boxes that users can click on. So here I just clicked on the first box here, which is the built and physical environment domain. And these text boxes are split into the different domains that we have on the layer groups, just to organize them a bit. And there's a few different kind of written narratives about the different climate vulnerabilities that we don't have geospatial data for. So for example, here we have the heating and cooling centers to just talk about how the absence or the amount of cooling centers is helpful for dealing with extreme heat. And so you might look at something like this in relation to climate projections to get a more holistic understanding of how climate change could affect a certain area in Vermont. So far I've shown you kind of the zoomed out version if you're just looking at how impacts across the state could play out, but this tool is also helpful for zooming in into a specific spot in Vermont. So what I can do is search in the search box a certain town or city. In this example, I searched Burlington. And what's really great is when you search it, it'll immediately zoom into your area of interest. So you don't have to zoom in and try and find it on the map. So I zoomed into Burlington here by searching it in the search box. And then I went to the hazards because I was interested in looking at flooding across the area. So I clicked the inundation flooding section here, and then I chose to focus on the FEMA National Flood Hazard data. So looking at the legend, we can see the different designations that FEMA splits the different flooding hazards into. And it looks like for the most part, a lot of these areas are in the red, which is the 1% annual chance floodplain FEMA designation. So let's say I'm interested in, okay, I can see these areas. And then just a reminder, you can also change the transparency. So this is helpful for these kind of broad layers like this that cover a lot of the map. So you can increase the transparency. Excuse me. To see what's underneath the layers and get a better sense of the base map underneath. Okay. And then let's say that I wanted to look at how flooding or where the floodplain is in relation to certain areas of a city. So I went to the community domain and I clicked on the downtown district boundaries, which is this green layer right here. And then the neighborhood development areas, which is this blue area right here. So from just looking at the map, I can see that, okay, it looks like in the downtown area, a portion of it is in the FEMA National Flood Hazard area in the 1% annual chance floodplain. So that just can give me a broad, quick sense of which areas might be at risk. But if I want to get more granular, we also have data for that. So in this example, I went to the built and physical environment section here, and then I clicked on the critical assets layer. So this is showing me critical assets from E911, and it looks like they have the building footprint of the different critical assets to look at. And again, you can go to the legend, and then I can see that the different colors relate to the different types of critical assets. So we have schools, libraries, health clinics, etc. And just from quickly looking, I noticed this building right here that seems to be in the floodplain. And because it's purple, I know that it's a wastewater treatment plant. And then if I'm interested in learning more about it, I just click on it. And I get the information about the site name, the address, the county, etc. That's helpful for learning more about the location. And then I also just wanted to point out that this tool has a lot of data. So I'm only showing you a couple different examples, but we could also go to the infrastructure domain and click on power lines and look at where power lines and power poles are in relation to the floodplain, and also look at that. And then if I was writing a report or I wanted to share this with a colleague, I could always click on this little print button, and then it will pop up and ask you what template or what paper size you want. And then it will print out that map for you, and you can share or place it in a report. So I just showed you only a few ways that you could use the tool, but again, there's so much data in here and interesting ways you could combine things to find out more. So I hope you get to take a look at it and find out some interesting ways that climate change could affect different areas of Vermont. So I'm going to pass this back over to Melanie to close us out with the next steps.
Sure. And I think we did cover most of this when we were talking about where are we at now in the tool development, but so I think it's really just recapping those key steps. So again, we're finalizing the tool now by the end of February. We're doing the accompanying user guide and project report by mid-April. And at that time in mid-April, the tool will be released. And then there will be some training with the regional planning commissions, April to May. So I think at this point, if you could go to the next slide, Anna Claire, I think we're really at the point where we can pause and take questions. And I think given that many people in this group know each other and have had several of these meetings, I think maybe rather than entering the questions into the Q&A, we can go ahead and just raise hands. And maybe Anna Claire, if you could click off your presentation, and that way we can then just see everyone as we field questions. So if you have a question, you could go ahead and raise your hand, and we will do our best to respond.
And we could maybe start with, we received one question in the meeting chat during the presentation that I'll just go ahead and flag for everyone. Paula mentioned that at a previous meeting, it was mentioned that 87 degrees is the high temp benchmark for Vermont. So they were wondering if it's possible to customize the parameters to take that into account.
Anna Claire, is that something that you can speak to based on the climate data that we've worked with? Did we select 90 or can we do those different increments?
I think that's something we can do in future iterations of the tool. I think 90 was the first parameters we chose and that we implemented.
And then I think I see Leslie Ann's hand up. The names are all really small on my my screen.
That's okay. Well, first and foremost, I wanted to say how tickled pink I am to see how all of this has come together. It's very, very slick. It's very, very user-friendly. So kudos to taking in all the bits of feedback and information that got it to this point. I just wanted to maybe respond to Paula's question. And it sort of comes out of the fact that some work that we did a number of years ago, like 10 years ago, with the Department of Health and National Weather Service, folks who are on this call right now, determined that the threshold for heat warnings in the state are 87 degrees and not 90 as they are in a couple other places, just because of the human physiology across the Northeast, and putting out warnings at that lower 87-degree temperature is what we've tried to move towards. And so as we do further iterations, having that would be one additional piece that would be really helpful for us and be sort of like in line with how warnings go out.
Okay, great. That's helpful. We'll
I did have a
definitely
couple other questions, Melanie,
Sure.
if I could.
Yeah.
And one of them has to do with the floodplain mapping, and just curious if we looked at any of the NOAA inundation work that's coming out to sort of see what the difference is between the FEMA floodplain mapping and the NOAA floodplain mapping is, particularly around the sort of like 1%. And if we're looking at other more frequent types of flooding as opposed to the 100-year flood, which is the 1%. That's one of the pieces that I wanted to just raise. That's not a question to be answered now, but just kind of write them
No.
down for now.
Yeah.
And then the last one I wanted to just kind of flag is if there's a way of parsing out the various types of drought across the state, and looking at it from a number of perspectives and in terms of the sectors and the different types of impacts that are playing out. And it's awesome that you're pulling the stuff from the drought monitor, and looking at different ways of just sort of dissecting that and filtering would be awesome. So thank you.
Oh, great. Thank you. Those are all really, I think, helpful considerations and things I think for us to think through, and also as we think through recommendations for future iterations of the report, and making sure we're capturing all of that as the tool continues to evolve. So,
And really nice alignment with the National Climate Assessment and using a LOCA 2 data set. It's nice to see it sort of plotted at this level to see how things really shape out across not just Vermont, but the entire Northeast. So love that as well.
great. Thanks. Other questions or thoughts?
This is Ann Lawless from Wheelock. I just have a question. I'd love to know what other people on this call think about who will be using the tool and how will they use it. I mean, I did one of the beta tests, which I found quite challenging. And one of the biggest issues, I thought I had pretty decent internet speed, but getting those maps to load is beyond the pale for, I mean, I wouldn't be able to do it at my town hall. I mean, I know that's all gonna improve, but I'd be curious to hear what other folks who've had experience with it, what they all think. And I mean, it's just an awesome piece of work. Definitely, no question about it. This is very helpful today.
Well, thanks, Anne. And I know that I just want to say before, I know we want to get feedback from others, but we appreciate the brave beta testers who weren't given a comprehensive, like, there was really not training and there wasn't a complete user guide. So, yeah, we realize we're kind of really throwing you out there. So thanks for giving it a whirl.
It was fun.
But anyway, but I'll go ahead and pause there. So if others had thoughts in response to Anne's question.
Well, I can jump in quickly and want to echo my thanks, Anne, for beta testing. And I think ERG team will have to correct me if I'm wrong. I think some of the issues with the loading speed have been fixed now that the tool's hosted with ANR's server, because I had the same issues too. And I recently went into the tool and it was a lot faster. So hopefully that's solving some of it. I think to your point around users of the tool, as the task group was working on sort of the projects, understanding the scope of this and really the best use of it and doing engagement, thinking about municipalities as primary users of the tool to help with local hazard mitigation planning, local energy planning, emergency management planning, and sort of the realm of local planning and how to help incorporate climate change impacts into that sphere and then think about connecting to implementation actions. I think, we all heard through stakeholder engagement that capacity and sort of the ability to use a tool like this is a challenge, as it is with sort of any tool that the state rolls out. So that didn't change sort of the primary audience of the tool, but we are working, I think, as Melanie alluded to, working on a grant and sort of relationship with RPCs to really train them in detail on the use of this tool and think about how they can help roll it out to municipal officials and others at that level. So that will be kicking off sort of as the tool goes live, and we'll work on specific trainings and really taking the user guide down to a sort of municipal profile level to really explain how do the outputs of this tool actually help with local planning processes. So hope that we'll get to some of the sort of questions you're raising about usability.
Oh, it looks like Heather has her hand up.
Hi there. So I was talking with the head of our geologic survey, Ben DeYoung, and he was talking about how they are going to be receiving a grant which would look at vulnerability around landslides, essentially. And I was wondering, that maybe in future iterations that might be something that could be incorporated into this index.
And we do, and I'm not sure exactly the extent of what they're needing, Heather. I know we do have landslide data in there in the tool right now. So that's something that's in there. I'm not sure if it will meet the needs of what the person is looking for, but that is something that whatever data was available has been integrated on landslides.
Okay, yeah, I think they're getting the grant is through FEMA, so it might be helpful, or maybe it's updated or more precise or better at a future version.
Okay.
Okay.
Well, I can just jump in there, Heather, because we chatted with Ben about sort of what best available data we could incorporate into the tool on the landslides, and he alluded in email to some of that work that he was anticipating. I think obviously the timing didn't work out with the release of this, but certainly interested in incorporating any kind of hazard vulnerability assessments into future iterations of the tool.
Great, super, thanks.
Other thoughts or questions? Anything occur to you after the call, you can feel free to email me or maybe Marion if something pops up for you. digesting all the the information. No, Marion or Jane, is anything else that you'd want to mention before we end the conversation today?
Nothing else, just to thanks folks, again, particularly members of the task group who engaged in this work and really helped inform the outcomes, and excited to roll it out and continue to get feedback on it. And for folks who want to share this, we again did a public presentation on Tuesday. That recording and the slides for that are up on our website. We'll get slides and the recording from this up as well. And so hope to use that for to share for folks who weren't able to attend live. But thanks, everyone.
Right. All right, well, thank you, everyone.
Thank
Enjoy
you.
the rest of your Friday. We have a little bit of sun here in Vermont. Woo! So hope you can make the most of it. And thanks again for your attendance and participation throughout the course of the project.
Thanks, everyone.